Strangers from distant lands, friends of old. As we continue our investigation on Sauron's footprints, in this video we will look at some strange events that have been left unresolved in the first season of Rings of Power. Without further ado, let's begin. Perhaps one of the biggest mysteries in the first season was the blight upon the tree of Lindon. Although we are told that the light of the Eldar was fading, we were not given convincing arguments on why it was in the city of Lindon and why it was this particular tree that it originated. Gil-galad is quite convinced that it is an outer manifestation of an inner reality and told Elrond that they first took notice of it just prior to Galadriel's return. This is quite interesting. Why was it just then? Has anything major happened? Were there a war, invasion? We are given another significant information about this time. Remember what the elf told Elrond at the beginning of the first episode.
The council regrets to inform you, you won't be permitted to attend the next session. Elf lords only.
It is perhaps okay that Elrond is not the Elrond from the Lord of the Rings yet, but this elf lords only meeting must have some important attendees, such that Elrond, son of Erendil, could not attend. Or perhaps the contents of this meeting was something that Elrond should not have known. Nonetheless, it is safe to assume that Celebrimbor, the ruler of Eregion, was also one of the attendees, as we see him just after the ceremony. Already, Celebrimbor and Gil-galad are convinced that they need Elrond's help to get to the truth of the Mithril legend, by going to Moria and talking to his old friend Durin the Fourth. Although this is from later episodes, we hear an interesting sentence from Celebrimbor.
But if this was to be our salvation, I'm afraid we needed it sooner.
But I almost had it sooner. It was only in speaking with the Southlander that I realized...
The low man? This idea was his?
At the time of the scene, Gil-galad, Celebrimbor, Elrond, Galadriel, and most importantly Halbrand have been working on this project which will cure the fading of the light of the Eldar. With this sentence, we can also infer that there were previous efforts to accomplish it. Could this be related to the Celebrimbor's visit to Lindon at the same time as the farewell ceremony for Galadriel? Could another elf lord be accompanying Celebrimbor and attend the elf lords only meeting? Although none of them are conclusive, let's just keep in mind that there might be a figure that was not shown to the audience. Next, we come to the main course, the Tree of Lindon. One thing that was a focal point during the first season is the sickness of the tree. Gil-galad was mainly concerned about the tree and was desperate to find a way to stop the blight. So the main question is, what caused this blight? Is it directly connected to the fading of the elves? Was it something that was triggered to conceal some other plan in action? If a close contact was necessary, how can an evil character infiltrate perhaps the best defended elven city? These are open questions, but we think we have the answers, albeit it requires connecting some dots. Let's first inspect how the tree shows the symptoms. It seems to ooze a black ink, the leaves are falling down, and they tend to disintegrate once touched. Have we seen anything similar before? Well, actually, yes. It was something from the first minutes of the series. Let's recall how the trees in Valinor was destructed.
So when the great foe Morgoth destroyed the very light of our home.
Although we are not shown a physical manifestation of Morgoth here, it is implied that he was nearby the trees to cast a sort of spell on them. As a side note for the book readers, Ungoliath, the ancestor of Shelob, was the one who sucked the light off the trees, and that's how they perished in the books. In this scene, also pay attention to the way the leaves fall, the way they disintegrate. They are not exactly the same, but it feels like the responsible parties for both phenomena share some similar skills in dark magic. So what do we have here? Elrond not attending a meeting in Lindon, Gil-galad tricking Elrond to go to Moria, Celebrimbor confessing that he already tried to forge the item of great power, and the blight upon the tree in Lindon. A bunch of seemingly independent events, but once you look at them all together, then you see a pattern. A mathematician called Bernoulli once said about Newton, I recognize the lion by his paw. And here is the picture of the lion that appears once you connect all the dots and offer you a more tightly knit version of the story. Well before the events of the first season, Sauron had been trying to forge an item of great power, a power of the unseen world, in his fortress at Forodwaith, one that could enable him to dominate over all peoples of Middle-earth. He had many experiments which failed, and meanwhile forced him to sacrifice many of his orc followers. He also tried to find exotic materials that can help him, perhaps most importantly mithril. You might say that the existence of mithril was not well known, but the legend of the roots of Itaglier, which Gil-galad and Elrond talked about, was commonly known, and best described as apocryphal, by Elrond. Since Adar was the literal father of the orcs, he stopped Sauron by splitting him open. By his words,
I split him open. I killed Sauron.
although the details are unknown, Sauron must have had a stressful time, where his spirit had to find another host, another body, and it was Halbrand, or the person who had that body before. He had all the reason to continue his plans on dominating Middle-earth, and he tried to find a way to infiltrate the Free Kingdoms who possessed large-scale forges. We think Moria was one of the first that he tried to win over, but during the third is the embodiment of stubbornness. Yet Sauron did not totally fail. We have prepared a dedicated video which argues that Disa is or about to be a spy of Sauron. Please refer to that one for related evidence. Next, he tried Eregion. As Sauron himself said,
Celebrimbor. The master I apprenticed to used to speak of the wonders of your craft. I never dreamed I'd ever get the chance to see them in person.
You a smith?
Well, nothing like your artistry.
he knew Celebrimbor had the greatest skill in Middle-earth, and he thought he could use his knowledge to harness this power of the unseen world. But how should he approach him? As a human who suspiciously have great forging skills? Asking questions that only concern immortals? Here he decided to change his looks and shapeshift into an elf. You might say, hold on, how could he do that? As a quick note from Silmarillion, you can check out how he is great at shapeshifting during his fight with Huan, the greatest of all wolfhounds in the First Age. For the sake of the argument, once he chooses to appear as an elf, all the bias would disappear. He is just an elf bearing gifts, playing to the appetite of Celebrimbor on how to achieve great things, aiming to surpass Feanor. Some viewers might have already guessed that this unknown elf, which appears in Tolkien's writings, is actually called Annatar, which means the Lord of the Gifts. Although small, I think we are teased by the Rings of Power creators when the elf says,
Elf lords only.
Annatar and Celebrimbor must have worked on this grand project together, but essentially failed. We think this is the period that Celebrimbor refers to when he says,
But I almost had it sooner.
Next, Annatar, just to repeat, he is just Sauron disguised as an elf, goes to Lindon to search for other means to expand the experiments and ask for more resources or something similar from the High King Gil-galad. But let's imagine, if he were to tell him directly that he aspires to forge items of great power, what would the High King say? Come on, you are an elf. Be graceful, be respectful to the nature, and live on. How to convince him then? Would creating an emergency make him fear? Make him work for you without him knowing? Here let us listen to Sauron himself.
In an instance like this, it seems to me that you do well to identify what it is that your opponent most fears.
And exploit it.
No. Give them a means of mastering it, so that you can master them.
What could be the most precious thing that would cause Gil-galad to dismiss his self-caution and let these crazy elves experiment with exotic materials that could harness the power of the unseen world? And at last we come to the Tree of Lindon, the livelihood of the elves in Middle-earth and the symbol of the capital. If Sauron could find a way to threaten the tree, then Gil-galad would be just at the mindset that Sauron could master him, At this stage, we can ask ourselves, how could Sauron create the blight on the tree? Let's recall a similar scenario from the beginning of the series.
So when the great foe Morgoth destroyed the very light of our home.
We already mentioned the similarities, but we also know that even though Sauron was the perhaps greatest of all Maiar, he is nowhere close to Morgoth in terms of might and magic. So let's remind ourselves, if there were any opportunity that Sauron might get close to the tree without requiring him to do a remote spell. And we have a winner, the farewell ceremony. The ceremony which would send the persistent elf who still thinks that the enemy is out there and alerting all the elves non-stop. Wouldn't it be nice if Sauron disguised as Annatar visit Lindon for an important meeting? And would it not also make sense that he attended the ceremony, during which the High King will announce the days of war is over? Would it not give him a chance to approach the tree? And most importantly, could this Annatar not be the dark figure we mentioned in the beginning of the video? As Sauron figured the Achilles heel for Gil-galad was the tree of Lindon, he was quite convinced to carry out the poisoning. Therefore, we know the exact time when Sauron poisoned the tree at the ceremony. We can even say that Sauron, disguised as Annatar, is in this picture. You might ask, then what happened? We think that after the ceremony, Annatar said farewell to Celebrimbor and advised him to continue on the grand plans until he runs some errands. It also makes sense that it was him who first whispered the need for Mithril into the ears of Celebrimbor. Then Celebrimbor opened up the story to Gil-galad, who is already in defense mode. In turn assigned Elrond to get him Mithril from the dwarves, using its friendship to Durin IV. After this, Sauron, disguised as Halbrand, now a human, searched for a ship to get to Numenor. At this point, he heard of the level of civilization the men achieved in Numenor and wanted to see if their forging technology could help him somehow. We think his ship was attacked by the sea dragon and was genuinely surprised to see Galadriel again, as he thought he shipped her to Valinor for good. The rest we know from the episodes. To recap, we think Sauron had conspired behind the scenes almost as much as he did in front of it. He befriended Celebrimbor, playing to his aspirations, and then poisoned the tree of Lindon to master Gil-galad by mastering his fears. All in all, it was Galadriel who gave Sauron the last piece of the puzzle that taught him how to use Mithril successfully, a la not forced but coaxed. There are side stories to this related to how Finrod's dagger plays a role, as well as Sauron possessing Mithril with him in the first season. We have prepared a playlist to follow Sauron's footprints and highly recommend you to check out. And subscribe to the channel for the latest updates. We also greatly appreciate your support on the channel. Please consider liking the video if you enjoyed it. And finally, we think that these are enough evidence to point the blame on Sauron. But if you are still not convinced, just ask yourself if you could accept the coincidence that the blight on the tree just started when the unknown elf lord paid a visit to the city and had the opportunity to get close to it. After this, Gil-galad went to a frenzied state in which he used Elrond as a tool to get Mithril from Moria. Once Gil-galad is in the right mindset, Celebrimbor and therefore Sauron could go on with the experiments with approval. We shall find the definitive answer in the second season, but we will continue inspecting the story in the first season in our next video. Until then, Namarie.